The eternal punishment Sisyphus endures in Hades has also entered language and lore. But there is much more to his story than the famous stone he is doomed endlessly and fruitlessly to push uphill. Sisyphus was a wicked, greedy, duplicitous, and often cruel man. But who cannot find something appealing, heroic even, in the unquenchable zest and fist-shaking defiance with which he lived, in fact outlived, his life? Few mortals dared to try the patience of the gods in so reckless a fashion. His foolhardy contempt and refusal to apologize or conform put one in mind of a Grecian Don Giovanni. Deucalion and Pyrrha, the survivors of the Great Flood, had had a son named Helena, after whom the Greeks to this day call themselves Hellenes. Helena's son, Aeolus, had 4 sons: Sisyphus, Salmoneus, Athamas, and Cretheus. Sisyphus and Salmoneus hated each other with as visceral and implacable a hatred as the human world had yet witnessed. Rivals in their parents' affections, rivals in everything. From the cradle, neither could bear to see the other succeed. The 2 princes outgrew their father's realm of Aeolia, as Thessaly was called in those days, and moved south and west to found their own kingdoms. Salmoneus ruled over Elis, and Sisyphus established Ephyra, later called Corinth. From these fastnesses they glared at each other across the Peloponnese, their bitter enmity growing with each passing year. Sisyphus hated Salmoneus so much it robbed him of his sleep. He wanted him dead, dead, dead. The desire was so agonizing he stabbed himself repeatedly in the thigh with a dagger to relieve himself of it. But there was nothing he could do. The Furies would avenge themselves terribly if he dared murder a brother. Fratricide was amongst the worst of the blood crimes. Eventually, he decided to consult the oracle at Delphi. Sons of Sisyphus and Tyro rise to slay Salmoneus, intoned the Pythia. This was sweet music to Sisyphus's ears. Tyro was his niece, daughter of his hated brother Salmoneus. All Sisyphus had to do was marry and get sons from her. Sons who would rise to slay Salmoneus. Uncles could marry nieces without raising any eyebrows in those days, and so he set about beguiling and seducing Tyro with horses, jewels, poems, and oceans of personal charm. For Sisyphus was nothing if not captivating when he chose to be. In due course his wooing won her. They wed, and she bore him 2 bouncing boys. One day, some years later, Sisyphus was out fishing with his friend Melops. Sunning themselves on the banks of the river Sithus, they fell into conversation. At exactly the same time, Tyro set out from the palace with a maid, the 2 boys, now aged 5 and 3, and a hamper of food and wine, with the idea of surprising Sisyphus with a family picnic. Back on the riverbank, Melops and Sisyphus talked lazily about horses, women, sport, and war. Tyros's group made their way across the fields. "Tell me, sire," said Melops, "it has always surprised me that despite your bitter feud with King Salmoneus, you chose to marry his daughter. For all that I can tell, you still dislike him as much as ever." "Dislike him? I abominate, loathe, despise, and abhor him," said Sisyphus with a loud laugh. A laugh that allowed the approaching Tyro to draw a bead on his exact position. As her body drew near, she could now hear every word her husband spoke. "I only married that bitch Tyro because I hate Salmoneus so much," he was saying. "You see, the oracle at Delphi told me that if I had sons by her, they would grow up to kill him. So when he dies by the hand of his own grandchildren, I'll be rid of my vile pig of a brother without fear of the pursuit of the Erinyes." "That is," Melops tried to find the word, "brilliant, cunning, ingenious." Tyro checked her sons, who were about to run to the spot from which they could hear their father's voice. Turning them round, she pushed them at speed toward a bend in the river, the maid following behind. Tiro had swallowed Sisyphus's charm whole, but she loved her father Salmoneus with a loyalty that overrode any other consideration. The idea of allowing her sons to grow up to kill their grandfather was out of the question. She knew how to defy the oracle's prophecy. "Come, child," she said to the eldest. "Look down at the stream. Can you see any little fishes?" The small boy knelt on the riverbank and looked down. Tiro put a hand to his neck and pushed him under. When he had stopped struggling, she did the same to the youngest. "Now," she said quite calmly to the traumatized maid, "this is what you will do." Sisyphus and Merops caught plenty of fish that afternoon. Just as the light was fading and they had started to pack up for the day, Tiro's maidservant appeared before them, bobbing a nervous curtsy. "Beg pardon, Majesty, but the Queen asked that you might greet the princes. They are by the riverbank, awaiting your Majesty. Just behind the willow tree, sire." Sisyphus went to the place indicated to find his two sons lying stretched out on the grass, pale and lifeless. The maid ran for her life, and she was never heard of again. Tiro, by the time the enraged Sisyphus had reached the palace with drawn sword, was safely on her way to her father's kingdom of Elis. On her arrival home, Salmoneus married her to his brother Cretheus, with whom she was deeply unhappy. Salmoneus himself, quite as proud and vainglorious as his hated brother, had set himself up in Elis as a kind of god. Claiming to equal Zeus's power to summon storms, he'd ordered the construction of a brass bridge over which he liked to ride his chariot at breakneck speed, trailing kettles, cauldrons, and iron pots to mimic the sound of thunder. Flaming torches would be thrown skyward at the same time to imitate lightning. Such blasphemous impertinence caught the eye of Zeus, who ended the farrago with a real thunderbolt. The king, his chariot, brass bridge, cooking utensils, and all were blasted to atoms, and the shade of Salmoneus cast down to eternal damnation in the darkest depths of Tartarus. Sisyphus held a great feast to celebrate the death of his preposterous thunder-making brother. The morning after, he was awoken by a deputation of aggrieved lords, landowners, and tenant farmers. After he had rubbed the sleep from his eyes and cleared his headache with a goblet of unwatered wine, he consented to hear what might be the matter. "Majesty, someone is stealing our cattle. Each one of us can report a loss. Your own royal herds are depleted too. You are a wise and clever king. Surely you can find out who is responsible." Sisyphus dismissed them with a promise to investigate. He had a very good idea that the thief was his neighbor, Autolycus. But how to prove it? Sisyphus was guileful and smart, but Autolycus was a son of Hermes himself, the prince of robbers and rascals, the god who as an infant had rustled Apollo's cattle. From Hermes, Autolycus had inherited not only this propensity to take cows that did not belong to him, but also powers of enchantment that made it very difficult to catch him in the act. Besides, the cattle that Sisyphus and his neighbors had lost were brown and white and generously horned, while those of Autolycus were black and white and entirely hornless. It was baffling, but Sisyphus was sure that spells taught by Hermes were behind it, and that Autolycus was secretly color-changing stolen cows. "Very well," he said to himself. "We shall see which proves the more powerful. The cheap magic of a trickster god's bastard, or the native wit and intelligence of Sisyphus, founder of Corinth, the cleverest king in the world." He commanded that all his and his neighbor's cattle should have the words, "Autolycus stole me," carved into their hooves in tiny lettering. Over the next 7 nights, as expected, the local herds continued regularly to be depleted. On the 8th day, Sisyphus and the leading landowners paid Autolycus a visit. "Greetings, my friends," the neighbor cried with a cheery wave. "To what do I owe the honor of this visit?" "We have come to inspect your cattle," said Sisyphus. "By all means. Are you thinking of breeding black and whites yourself? My pedigree herd is unique in the region, they tell me." "Oh, it's unique, all right," returned Sisyphus. "Whoever saw hooves like this?" He lifted the foreleg of one of the cows. Autolycus leaned forward, read the words carved into the hoof, and gave a cheerful shrug. "Ah," he said. "Well, fun while it lasted." "Take them all," commanded Sisyphus. As the landowners led the animals away, Sisyphus looked toward Autolycus's house. "I think I'll help myself to all your cows," he said. "Every last heifer," by which he meant Amphithea, Autolycus's wife. Sisyphus was not a good man. The achievement of outsmarting the progeny of the trickster god went to Sisyphus's head. He began to believe that he really was the cleverest and most resourceful man in the world. He set himself up as a kind of royal problem solver, pronouncing on all manner of issues brought to him and charging enormous sums for his rulings. But there is a difference between guile and good sense, cunning and judgment, quick-wittedness and wisdom. Do you recall the Asopos? It was in the waters of this Boeotian river that the Theban priestess Semele had washed, attracting the attentions of Zeus and bringing about the birth of Dionysus. Unhappily, the god of that river had a daughter, Aegina, who was beautiful enough to catch Zeus's eye. In the form of an eagle, the god swooped down and seized the girl, taking her to an island off the coast of Attica. The distraught river god searched everywhere for her, asking everyone he met if they had seen any sign of his beloved daughter. "A young girl? Dressed in goatskin, you say?" responded Sisyphus when his turn came to be pressed for information. "Why, yes. I saw just such a maiden snatched up by an eagle not long ago. She had been bathing in the river when he dived out of the sun. It was the most... Where did he take her? Did you see? Are those bracelets real gold? I must say they are very fine. Take them, they are yours. Only for pity's sake tell me what happened to Aegina." "I was high on a hill, so I saw the whole thing. The eagle took her to... That ring of yours, an emerald, is it? Oh, I thank you. Now let me see. Yes, they flew across the sea and landed there, on that island. Come, to the window. You can just make it out on the horizon, see?" "Oh, Nona, they call the island, I believe. That's where you'll find them." "Oh, are you leaving?" Asopos chartered a boat and made his way to the island. He hadn't made it halfway over before Zeus saw him coming and sent a thunderbolt across his bows. Its blast swept Asopos and his boat in a great tidal bore up his own estuary and into his river. But Sisyphus, Zeus had had his eye on that villain for some time. It had not gone unnoticed to the god of Xenia that Sisyphus had a history of abusing the guests that traveled in his lands, taxing them, plundering their treasures, making free with their women, shamelessly transgressing every canon of the sacred laws of hospitality. And now he presumed to interfere in matters that were none of his business, to meddle in the affairs of his betters, to tell tales on the king of the gods himself. It was time to take measures. An example must be set that would serve as a warning to others. Death and damnation to him. Despite Sisyphus's royal blood, his life had been too wicked, too shameless, Zeus ruled, to merit the dignity of his being conducted to the underworld by Hermes. Instead, Thanatos, Death himself, was sent to shackle and escort him.